Welcome to our training session on Synergi Electric. We're going to focus on data source information and data and file management. I guess is another way you can put it. But what I want to do is first bring up the technical document that has our training material. And I just want to go through up to date here where we're at with the beginning of this training, online training. And Dr. Trussell had put this slide together a number of years ago, but I think we keep coming back to it because as we advance the software, we add more and more opportunity to pull in external data into the software, as well as working with a number of different data formats within the product itself. So when we have the flexibility of working with a number of different data types, larger or smaller sets, it tends to become a management issue where you want to make sure you're getting the information into the software so you're getting accurate or as accurate results as you can get, but without spending a lot of time doing that. So one of the goals here today is to clearly define what your data source information is and how you can apply to the Synergi interface and ultimately to the results. So you're seeing relatively quick input and be able to evaluate and look at your output. We'll go to our first slide. So most of the talk is going to be focused around data sources, and I've got some other tools to help manage those and to keep track of information. But the main topic and the foundational topic here is going to be on data sources. So Synergi has been a file-based application for a number of years, moved into the database format as the databases became more on a personal level as well as enterprise level. And now we have clients using everything from middle link or comma separated files to access databases to a number of different enterprise databases, SQL Server, Oracle, etc. So we're going to go through, and most of what I'll be talking about is consistent throughout the different file formats. If it's not, I'll go ahead and point those out for you as we move along our discussion. First, I want to do is jump back into Synergi here, or over to Synergi, and just start with define what is a data source. And a data source can be a number of different data sets in different formats. Things you would think of first would be your model data information as well as your equipment or warehouse. But beyond that, we have a number of data sets or data types that allows you to bring in equipment settings, switch status, for example, or model updates, and etc. So I'll be covering several examples as we move through the training for today. If we go into our data source, and this is called the data source editor, and this manages the data sources you've created and stored or you've just been recently working with. So there's a number of different ways we can do that. I don't have any enterprise database examples here because I don't have Oracle client or a SQL Server client set up. However, the same steps and procedures would be the same managing the data in terms of the data source with respect to the personal database and flat files and the enterprise databases, with the exception of credentials. All right, so just go in, as you can see here under the description, these are user defined. So let's just go into this first one here. Go into edit. And this editor is going to step you through the required input as well as provide you some alternative input just for additional information. This happens to be a binary file. For those of you who have been working with the support email as part of the support reporting, back to our team here, we do have a binary file format that you can create with your working model in memory, save it as a binary file and attach it to a support email. So that's one of the main features. We do use binary here quite a bit between our clients. It's a smaller footprint. It can't open it unless you have a licensed version of Synergi. It allows us to receive those files, load them into Synergi very quickly, and then start quickly evaluating your support request. So on the whole list here, as I mentioned, we have a number of different formats, starting with Access, which is predominantly what we consider a personal database. Most of our clients are working with an Access unless they're a large utility and they've moved to the Oracle or SQL environment. We do some with SQL on the server side, or not SQL, but Access, but it's not common. We have a few clients that will have an Access server, but if they're looking to leverage the server environment, they typically move up to Oracle or SQL Server. For those of you who are not familiar with Informix is a proprietary data store. It's a very large database system. This was developed for a key client a number of years ago to allow them to save their Synergi models and warehouse information into their corporate database. And then we get into the file-based interface, Microsoft Excel, Middlelink 3.4, which is an older comma-separated file format, Middlelink, which is a comma-separated file, but it's not the later format with the Excel spreadsheet, Multispeak, MySQL, Oracle, Pi. A number of our clients have Pi Historian scripts, allow them to connect to their Pi Historian database and then pass that script to Synergi to load in specific status of equipment such as switches or breakers, loading, voltages and information you can directly back into the Synergi product. So if you have questions about any of these data sources and how you might want to leverage them, feel free to drop us an email at at the support, and we'll be happy to assist you and give you some examples. But when we get into the second step of the data source editor, this is very straightforward in terms of the path. If it's file-based, you just browse out to that location. This happens to be on my desktop. It's a binary file. Jump out to my desktop here. I can scroll down and find my binary file, EDM. There it is. South Penn EDM. I'll cancel that. If it's username and password required, many times when you're working with an enterprise database where you need login credentials, this is where you'd put your username and password. And anytime you're working with a data source, we recommend that you take the opportunity, take the time to make sure you test it before you move on to other settings, so that if it don't make the right connection here or a failure, then you can at least step back and look for what's causing that connection issue. Obviously, I just tried to click on a binary file. The binary file is binary, so it cannot test that file because it's not open for the Synergi to open it and read it, unless you're using the file load process instead of the editor here. Under the data sources, once you've defined the path and the file name and the file type, then you specify what categories you want to be able to save and store and utilize data within that data source. We have a number of options here, starting with our CMM, which is our customer management module that provides detailed customer load and customer class and other customer information from an integrated solution as part of a load to Synergi input import. We'll talk about custom a little bit later. I have an example, but the data mart is it's a database location where you can store a number of different formats and be able to bring that directly into the product. Equipment's going to be the warehouse where you have your equipment, your nameplate, the regulators, has your transformers, switches, conductors, etc. Events category is going to be if you have outage data for the reliability module that's part of a licensed module of Synergi. The events information can be stored externally and then imported into the Synergi for evaluating reliability analysis results. Middle link is our spaced file format I mentioned earlier, but there's what's called a middle link table, so you can store information in table format. And of course, model would be that's your main Synergi model format, your inst section tables, as well as your inst meters and other inst type tables. We do have another set of tables called results, subsets, and versions. And the results allows you to run Synergi and then export or save out results into database table format we refer to as results. A subset is it's a middle link schema file format, but is a subset of your model information. So it may be a selection of switches and switch status, or it might be something to do with your voltage regulator types assigned to your model. So you can store these separately without having to store an entire middle link record of your model connectivity and equipment information. Here, we're going to go ahead and do model next. It's just going to give you a quick summary of what you've selected, and then you can update your data source. So I'm going to close this since I've already saved it. All right, so that is just stepping through the more of the wizard approach. You do have the ability to go back in and edit your data sources. So let's just go and step you through and add a data source for one of my models sitting on my desktop. So let's call this test DB. And we're going to go out to my model desktop, and we'll just set this one. We'll call it sample model. Always good to test the connection, make sure everything's working properly. Hit next, and this one I'm going to make it a model data. And you can also select additional tables or different data sources. So as I mentioned, you don't have to be limited to just one. You can pick any number of these. And what I'll do is, Synergi is going to create those tables within that same database that will be leveraged or utilized by other applications within the Synergi environment. I'm going to do both for those. Next, update. And notice here where it says description, is what I typed in, but the type is called model plus. So anytime you see a plus after your DSA designation, it just references that it's referencing other data sources as well as the main model information. Once you've created your data source, you want to make sure you save it. Now, you could go and work in Synergi, but if you close Synergi without saving your data source, then you lose that information. Or if Synergi crashes or something other happens where you can't go back and actually make updates to your data source and save it, you'll have to go back and redo it. Caution when you're working with data sources, whenever you make updates and you want to make sure to save them, just go ahead and save them as soon as you're done. And down at the very bottom, it'll give you a ribbon bar and your model has been saved successfully. All right, let's go back in the data sources here real quick. There's our test DB training, model plus. You can go back into edit and make changes to it if we need to. Test connection. There's our two data source types. Everything looks good. So you can come back in here anytime and just review it and make updates as necessary. We talked about data types in the process here. What I want to do is go into our help documentation. And What I've done here is that if you want to get detailed information about each of those data types I referenced, to come into the help documentation, use F1 on your keyboard, type in data types or Synergi data types, and this is going to take you to this location where you can start looking at a little bit more in-depth, detailed description of what a data mart represents, which is and the different formats you can save this information into. So we're not limiting to any one format unless it's a specific, like binary format. Obviously, that's the single format because that's the non-editable format. So you can see here, we're looking at data mart equipment. Equipment is equivalent to your warehouse, your nameplate, and other information about your equipment. Cell formats are used for some of the specific analysis types where you want to be able to bring in detailed data to support the input into those analysis. And here's an example of 8760 analysis, batch analysis, and data lake. Time series are examples of utilizing Excel spreadsheets as part of the input into the analysis process. Historian is another a grouping, but most of the time when we talk about historian, it's going to be Pi historian or other enterprise databases such as SQL Server or MySQL, which is a personal database, Oracle, where semi-real-time data can be stored and linked to the Synergi model through scripting, and then bring that into the Synergi product. For the model types, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we support a number of different model types, including Access, Enterprise, Middle Link, Binary, and XML formats. I'm not going to go down through every one of these. We've covered these a little bit already. If you have the questions, you can just jump back in here and take a little bit more in-depth look at how those are set up. So I'm going to go back into Synergi, close that. Go back into, there's a couple utilities here for working with your data sources. You've got your validate data sources and your data source editor. We're going to start with validating data sources because as you work through, especially if our clients are working with a number of different models over a period of time, those model files get moved or renamed and they no longer are valid in terms of the data source. So validating those from time to time is very important, or having someone that is your key resource that you can go to and say, hey, periodically we need to make sure these are validated. If these are old, we need to have them removed. So that's another factor to consider about making updates to these data sources. This is going to run a report. I've got a lot of them. That one, since it's an invalid one. This is going to give a very large report on how many data sources you have. And you can see I have this test warehouse to be on my desktop, test warehouse 17009. It's likely related to a support case ID number. And case was updated, closed, and the file remained out on my desktop. So, or it got moved from the desktop somewhere else, or actually deleted. The report doesn't tell you what happened to the file. It just says that the original DSA is no longer valid for that location or that file type. This is a very useful, you can use a filter function here. Just type in INV or IN, or just I think you should start with I. It should be able to filter your invalid DSAs, and then you can start going back and cleaning things up. Okay, let's go back and look at the other option here with the data source editor. And this allows you to list your data sources by source type. In this case, I'm looking at the model called TestDB training, which is one of the example data sources I created earlier. I'm going to say OK. When you bring that up, it's going to bring up this is an Access database, so it's going to bring up the table information. You don't have to go out and open up the Access database directly. In many cases, when I'm working support or working on making changes to a database, utilizing some database tools, it's easy for me to go out to Access and search and find things, but we have a tool built into Synergi, so you don't have to necessarily go out and open up the file on your local folder or your network folder. You can grab it right from the data source that's already defined. Let's look at your int section table. These fields are editable. So if I wanted to make a change here and make a conductor 1-aught ACSR, I can just change it to 1-aught ACSR. And close this. We'll save it into the database. I would recommend that use this to look at information, but if you want to do any major changes to a date, just go out to the Access database, or you can use what's called the SQL dashboard in Synergi. So you can write SQL code to update or delete or other changes that you want to make to your external model or warehouse. Down the bottom, I think this is just going to be, this is just going to be all of the tables, which represents the model tables. And then there's a few tables in here that do not have the INST, and that's the node table. I think that might be it, and the gnodes table. So those are the two. Anything with nodes and gnodes and loads. So 3 tables. So this actually might be more interesting. You can come in and changes to your load information, customers per phase. Let's go into the data source editor, and we're going to work our way down to doing a couple of the data sources here. So we're going to look at types. We've got model data we talked about earlier with the plus, which means it has some other data associated with it. This happens to be this model and equipment. We have the results data set, got a partial file, a lake, and we're going to go through and talk about each one of these examples. Okay, so let's call with test results. This database, go back, let's see if I can find, this is going to be on desktop. I've marked results as my content and update, and then save it. I want to show you another one here. So we have results, partial file, link format, paid it out on the server, a C drive for support. Then one of the things that partial file is a middle link file format. So there is a couple other things here you can change or update as part of that with regard to the phasing and voltage space. I'd recommend not changing these unless there's a specific need to. And if you have questions on that, please contact us at support. Okay, so now that I'm under the data source here for, this is my meters, that's it. Middle link, metered amps and power factor, partial file, middle link format, and file location. Let's look at one of our ones called a subset. So go back to data source, and we're going to pick a subset, a model subset, personal access database, and it is called sample data. And I'm going to open the file on, I'm just going to, it's out on documents, DNVGL, Electric, 6, sample data. For that, there we go. Sample model, there it is. So you can see here under the sample model data, at the very bottom, I have a number of subsets. This happens to be for switches and elbows. You can see the section ID, the from device type. There's a number of different type formats here. If you have questions on those, I don't have those in front of me right now, but if you need to find out, I believe this would be node, use, source, could be recloser. So anyway, these are related to model information, like I said, but I don't have that definition in front of me. So if you have questions on that, please contact us at support. We'll be happy to get that to you. If we back up here, we see a number of other subsets. That one loaded here. We do. This is actually a subset I created for a client that is asking for a way to, you go through and select model information in Synergi in a query mode. You can see it as grade highlighted in your model. And there's other ways you can go into different views and look at the model information and see that they're in a query set. Also a way to do that by saving it out as a subset. We call this subset query series reactor 50 microhenries. These are in query, and then going down and finding out if it's to be one of the sections in that model that factor assigned to it based on the query set that we put in place. It's not just model changes, but looking at how we can share information about specific model information with a query and then using the database as a way to store that information and share it. So there's our subset. I'll save that. Let's look at our data lake. And I'm going to open that file. All right, so there's that file. This is a meter 101 record, link file format, and we are saving it as a data lake schema. Data lake is part of the file import and export process in Synergi. We're seeing a lot of clients starting to use data lake, be able to save out switch status, happens to be meter information, amps, factor, or ship West Martin, which is one of our sample model feeders in the sample model. And along with the name, we also have the unit type. So this is going to be amps, the amps demand type, and of course, along with amps is going to be power factor as defined in the Synergi interface. This file can be stored, can be shared, and then loaded directly into the Synergi. This happens to be ship West Martin feeder, 120 amps, 130, 140. Just save it. I'll just close this, save it. Back in the Synergi, data lake, data source type, date, is it, and go to data lake, sheet. If I can find, there it is. So what we had, what's going on there is that DSA still needs to be updated for a sheet name. So in Excel, you can have any number of sheets saved as part of your data source information with a spreadsheet. So as part of the DSA to load it back into Synergi, that DSA needs to be updated with the specific sheet name. That didn't come through, but that's the process you would go through to load in a data lake file. I'm going to switch gears from data sources to just working with models in general with putting and working with Synergi. So when Synergi starts, if we go back to model and we go to macros, the macros area, there's a number of different scripts that we work with. The first farthest to the left here is what we call a recipe or macro. We can get in, we'll have subsequent training under the EA automation of Synergi to allow you to automate a lot of what you would do manually in the Synergi product. So keep an eye open for that if that class hasn't already been offered as part of the online training. If it hasn't, we'll be offering that soon. For startup, we have a script allows you, it's called startup. And I prefer to use the notepad editor just for simplicity. So I bring that up. We get a lot of questions from clients asking about the startup script, if it's has been written, but then changes have been made in terms of the name of the file or the location, and now all of a sudden the startup script's not working. So you need to make sure your scripting is in conjunction with any changes you make data sources if you want to automate some of those interface between the product and the external data. In the startup script, first item here is define these scripts numerically. So 3050 is defining, or in this case, it's defining the access model. Exactly the same between the sample warehouse and model with the exception of the 0010 effect here. So one is citing the fact that this is a house schema versus a 0, which is your model schema. And then beyond that, you just need to specify the location, which would be the DSA, data source alias, and the model name or file name. See here, the sample model.mdb is in the, by default, users, documents, electric 6 sample data, sample model.mdb. If you've defined your data source, be it one or both, in this case, or both example here, then you're going to need to, part of the startup, to say if there's already something loaded in memory, you need to remove it from memory before you load in your model or warehouse. So that's what we're seeing here. Create new model, basically blanks out or unloads any model that's currently loaded in memory. With the warehouse, unloads any model or warehouse, that's in memory. Next step is to say load database sample model. Now that's the data source alias or DSA name that's stored in your DSA tool that we just looked at previously. So you don't have to specify the location. You don't have to specify the type file. All of that's stored in the DSA. All you need to do is reference the DSA name as part of the load for the model and equipment. Protection is different. Protection is expecting protection information, Synergi expecting to be stored in a very specific location in your user document or user folder. In case you don't have to specify the location. You just have to specify the command to load the protection database startup. If you wanted to then do anything with color by options or loading in your corporate model or other functions, you can add that as well. Do that up there in the data source with the model, but you have other recipe commands you can add. In this case, we're just coloring by feeder as the default option. And then you need to end your recipe so Synergi can load the steps and you're up and running. A lot of times clients will not want to load sample and warehouse or even load any model at startup. So what they'll do is you just put a single quote in front of any one of these commands, basically blocking out the model and warehouse. And that's why you see this text string here with a single quote in front of it. So anything with a single quote, text, numeric, or any of the above, can be ignored if it sees that as the first character in the line that you're working with. And having spaces in between is not a big deal. Synergi just jumps to the next command sequence. I can like that. Some time we get support requests that start their Synergi environment or Synergi application. They are not seeing any fuses, reclosers, relays, etc. in their model as they would expect. What's happening there is that most likely protection data is either not being specified at startup or it's being blocked by putting a single quote in front of it. If you have questions about protection data information as it's missing, first thing to do is look at your startup script. Or have seen recently, and we'll probably see is that clients move to a more secure environment where they're storing corporate information and model information on a network server, network drive. If you do not have read-write permission for that folder, Synergi won't be able to load the protection database, for example, or the other model information that you may want to load in. So if you're having difficulty in that area, first check your credentials, the location of where these files are located or the protection database is stored. If you still can't get it to work, feel free to give us a call here at support, in the support area. So there's your startup script. So I'm not changing, so I'll just say no, don't change. You're good to go. So we talked earlier about DSAs and how to load files. Go into model and go to new. Close. I close down. Hit cancel at this point. I've just basically removed the model. So I'm not closing Synergi. I just want to remove the model. And same thing with the warehouse. So I go to new, hit cancel. It just removes it from memory. Minimize this. Let's maximize. So if I go here, minimize this. Show you is the ability to drag and drop. We've got sample model. So if I just let's grab the South Penn binary files. You just drag it into your workspace. And a lot of times our clients don't know that you can just simply drag and drop into Synergi. And this is very useful, especially if you're using these smaller access databases. It'll still load it even if it's larger. It just takes a little bit longer to load. If you're looking at middle link file, so let's just go to model new here, close that. Also merge files here as well. So sample model in middle link format, I can drag and drop that. Give me some information on what was loaded to my map, F2, and all the feeders are in that middle link file. Back here, new, close, cancel, and we've got a binary file, and here's the sample model. Advantage of the drag and drop, it's very convenient if you're using any number of files. If you drag and drop a file into a model that's already loaded, it's going to merge them, if I mentioned that earlier. And just be careful you don't merge things, because after that, you have to just basically close the model. You're not going to be able to, you could select the original feeders only in your map and then just save those out to a different database would be an example you could do. I want to talk about case files real quick. Files are binary in nature, and we're going to go to our left corner here. And you can see I've got one called K Jones right now. And a case file it's text-based, so bring up you can see here that this is the script editor, and there's a number of different scripts. This is our recipe start script that we talked about earlier. Here's loading the substation feeder information, protection database, loading the warehouse, zooming, and then ending. So that's an example of your startup script, but in what we call middle link format. Not the startup script format, but this is the older comma-separated middle link script information or format. Here, let's go to, sorry, let me go back here. And just want to show you what case files look like here. So it's the same one. Let's see, recipes. So as you get more familiar with these files, come down here into individual commands for running analysis, loading and importing, model modifications, pulling, elbows, switches, devices, customer section, etc. So questions on this is a little bit more advanced in terms of this training. However, I just wanted to show you application of the case files. You can set up your own files for running and loading models and running analysis and such. So if you have questions, feel free to send us a support request, and we'd be more than happy to step you through creating a file and saving it and utilizing that as part of your work or your planning process. Okay. So we are at the end of the scripting data DSA area, but then we want to move over to talk about the protection database a bit. Protection database is a separate database. Access database, let's go to protection. Let's go back to licensing here. Notice some of my items here are grayed out. It's because I have my protection module turned off. So I'm going to go back and get my to modules and turn my protection database, protection license back on. So now we're back in full swing here. You go into Synergi. We talked about the startup script, cleaning the protection database load option. You're in Synergi and you click on a protected device, and these manufacturer model and amp ratings, reclosers, breakers, etc. Delays, missing model. Check to make sure you've got your protection database loaded. So one way to manually do that is to go up here to library. This happens to be out here on my user folder. Goes to that protection database, that's where it's located. And I can just manually load it. Load it, now you have the access to utilize that protected device information at the device level. Let's talk about the protection database itself. Okay, so I'm gonna open up the database. We've defined this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tables. Curve definition are by manufacturer, model, rating, type, and curve name, and that's very consistent with the devices we're working with. It'd be a Kearney, would be a T for a fuse rating. So some of these will be on the level of detail, may have a little bit different information. Be good for Kearney. There's our dual element fuse. So the fuse isn't, yep, they're all together the same. Now the voltage rating, or the rating of the devices may vary. Obviously, if you're looking at a fuse rating is into the name, curve name, the curve points that are associated with the curve number here. And see there's other parameters with respect to description, user supplied or not. Update the database on we update it as often as we can. Typically it's released as updated with a major update to the product. Service releases don't necessarily mean, or point updates don't necessarily mean the new protection database will be released. We try to keep the protection database as current as possible as we get feedback from the client base so that we can provide you a valuable resource for your protection coordination. Back into manufacturers, right down into, let's stay with the, let's go. The Cooper, looking at curve definitions. You can see under Cooper, hold on, you can scroll down to see all the different Cooper into the other types, manufacturers. Here, response by manufacturer, or we have a library of different mechanical responses for the reclosers and breakers. Look up. So if you have questions on the protection database, if there are any manufacturer model rating devices that are not current in the protection database, please contact support. Happy to work with the manufacturer to work with you to get the detailed information. Allows us to, by equation based, by information on the curve itself, would request that you provide that to us and we can create those to the database and then publish that so everybody else has ability for those new updates on the fuses, reclosers, and breaker relay. So let's go back, this protection database. Okay, changes to it, the database. All right, I think we are just about done. Looks like that concludes the introduction to the management and DSAs and the protection database. If you have, we would encourage you to send us your questions so that we can share that with the development team as well as the other support engineers. Provide you some feedback as soon as we can. So thank you for your attendance, and we welcome you in future on training as we make those available to you.